So hello and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us for this webinar today on the Green Investment Declaration, a new initiative launched earlier this month by Operation Noah and the JustMoney movement. Some of you joined us a couple of weeks ago for a webinar on why invest in climate solutions, unpacking the urgent need for more money to flow towards climate solutions and exploring some of the theological principles for aligning our investments with our care for creation. But today is an opportunity to learn more about the Green Investment Declaration itself and discover how you can play your parts in growing the number of faith organisations committed to seeing positive impact for the planet through their investments. My name is Rosie Venner and I'm Programme Manager at JustMoney Movement, an ecumenical Christian charity based in the UK. We support a growing movement of individuals and congregations from across the UK who are connecting their faith and their finances and taking action, both in terms of decision making with our own money and also by campaigning for change in the way money is used by banks, businesses and institutions. With me today and speaking today, we have Clare Fussell from Operation Noah, Mathew Jensen and Catherine Dewitt from FaithInvest, and Mike Sturgess from the Diocese of Truro. I'll introduce each of them in a little more detail before they speak, but first a couple of practical notes. We are recording today's webinar up until the end of the speakers' presentations, and a link to the recording will be made available afterwards, along with the slides and resources mentioned. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions towards the end of the webinar by using the chat, and I'll explain later the process for this, but please do feel free to put questions into the chat as we go along. And if you use social media, please do engage with today's webinar using the hashtag #GreenInvestment. So on the next slide, we have the plan for our time together. First, hearing from Clare on the Green Investment Declaration itself, then understanding a little bit more about how we integrate faith values into our investing, what that process looks like from Mathew and Catherine from FaithInvest. And then a real life story from Mike from Truro, Diocesan Board of Finance, what it looks like to put that into practice and to seek positive impact through your investments. And as I said, finishing with some time for a Q&A. So let me hand over now to Clare Fussell, a campaign director at Operation Noah. Operation Noah is a Christian charity working with the church to inspire action on the climate crisis. Clare has a background in coordinating environmental campaigns, with experience leading the Climate Coalition, managing Christian Aid's campaign team and being environmental advisor for the Diocese of Bristol. I'll hand over to you now, Clare, for you to introduce the Green Investment Declaration.
Thank you, Rosie, and wonderful to see you all today. Thank you for joining us. As Rosie was saying, this is the second in a two-part webinar series to launch this initiative that's been developed by Operation Noah in partnership with JustMoney Movement and also supported by FaithInvest. And last week's session focused on the whys of green investment, and we heard from Doctors Margot and Martin Hodson on why we as faith institutions and churches, and indeed all sectors across society, urgently need to invest more in climate solutions and scale up flows of money towards green technologies that tackle the climate crisis. And today we're going to focus more on the hows. And we're thrilled to be hearing shortly from Catherine Dewitt and Mathew Jensen from FaithInvest, who will talk more about the process we can each go through as churches and organisations to better align our investments with our faith values. And I'm really excited to hear from Mike Sturgess as well from Truro Diocese, who's done just that, and to give us the practical know-how of how he's guided the diocese on this journey. But first, I'd like to introduce the new Green Investment Declaration and talk a bit more about how it's designed to help you to take these practical steps. So 18 months ago, Operation Noah published a report called Financing a Livable Future. And in that, we reported that if the world redirected $570 billion of annual planned oil and gas investments towards renewables, this could fully finance wind and solar energy expansion in line with the 1.5 degree target of the Paris Agreement. But in January this year, the International Energy Agency research stated that investment in low carbon electricity has actually exceeded this. we're likely to reach more than $900 billion just this year, largely powered by huge expansion in solar projects across China, which built as much new capacity in 2023 as the entire world did the year before. But this good news is tempered by the fact that global oil and gas investments are still rising and expected to increase by 7% this year, with oil and gas companies just spending a tiny 4% of their investment budgets on average on clean energy projects, while nationally owned oil companies spend even less. So there is a really big role for faith institutions to play in this picture. Faith institutions globally manage around 2.5 trillion, and that's trillion, not billion, pounds. And this money has a huge potential to shape the world we all want to see if it's invested in the right direction. And it's great to have seen the huge support of the divestment movement in recent years, which has meant that the vast majority of churches and faith institutions in the UK have now moved their money out of fossil fuels. But we, as stewards of all that we've been given, need to ensure that our funds aren't just being negatively screened for harmful activities, but are also being actively invested in positive activities that address this huge crisis that we all face. And that's where the Green Investment Declaration comes in. This has been designed to encourage and equip churches and faith institutions to start the journey of aligning their investments with their faith values and net zero aims, as well as to accompany those who are already on this journey and to have wisdom and learning to share with others. The declaration asks churches and faith groups to do three things. Firstly, to make a plan to invest more in climate solutions. Secondly, to make investments that have a positive impact. And thirdly, to communicate this, because it's so important to speak up about what we're doing and tell the good news stories, and because churches can have moral leadership and open up the space for others to follow suit. As Martin Hodson shared in our webinar last week, he talked about agency and urgency needing to act together to tackle the climate crisis. And we have the agency in that we know that we need to leave fossil fuels in the ground, and we have the green technologies that we can scale up, but we're lacking the urgency. And time is running out to avoid runaway global warming, and we don't have the luxury of waiting around for others to make the first move and put their money behind the green economy. We need all sectors of society to do so now, and the church can lead the way in this. So if we go to the next slide, this is a screenshot from the new website that we've just launched as a coalition of organisations around making your money work for God's creation. And we use this oak tree motif, partly because reforestation, as we know, is one solution to the climate crisis, but also because it's a good symbol for green growth. And this declaration is one way we can support each other as a community in making the financial decisions that help build a cleaner future, to share our stories, share our successes and our struggles. If we go to the next slide, there's set declaration text that we're asking each organisation to sign up to. And this is around our shared beliefs that we have the moral obligation to be advocates for climate, nature and humanity, and that by aligning our investments with our faith values and investing in climate solutions, we can have a positive social and environmental impact. And if we go to the next slide, there are 3 levels that are designed to sort of grow with you as your investment grows. We start with acorn, growing up into sapling, and then into an oak tree. And each organisation is invited to register your interest and provide some evidence of either your investment policy or annual report, which FaithInvest will then assess. And we'll get back to you with the level that you're at on this journey, plus a suite of assets to help you to publicise your involvement in it. There'll be logos to put on your website and materials, template press releases, social media assets, everything you need to be able to speak up about your involvement in this initiative. And then there'll be an ongoing programme of support for signatories driven by you, by the churches and faith institutions who'll be part of this, depending on what you might need to help you to move on this journey. So there will be a series of webinars and training sessions in the autumn, as well as faith-based resources for different ecumenical ones and for different denominations to support you as you help us to grow this movement for change. You'll find if you go to the website that's been shared in the chat, there's already FAQs there and some case studies of some organisations that are already on this journey, some of whom are on the call today, and great to see you. And there are also guides for church investors to guide you through the process of having the right conversations with your fund managers and the people who make the financial decisions in your organisations. So do go to the URL that's shared in the link and will be shared after this webinar as well. Have a look through the materials, involve the right people in your organisations to have these conversations, and join us in the movement of churches investing in a green future. Well, thank you very much. I think that's probably enough for me for now, and I'll hand over to Catherine and Mathew from FaithInvest, who can talk a little bit more about unpacking that process of moving your investments into this area.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you to Operation Noah and to the Just Money movement for having us, FaithInvest, join you here today. Congratulations on the launch of the Green Investment Declaration, and we're very excited to see how it grows over the coming years. So some of you here today may have already heard of us here in FaithInvest, or perhaps we are a new organisation to you. I'll just spend a minute or so just introducing who we are. So our vision in FaithInvest is a world where faith communities are actively contributing to a livable future by expressing their deepest values in the choices that they make around finance and investments. And we do this through three ways. We convene a vibrant network for faith-based investors. We provide insightful training, education, exchange, and collaboration. And perhaps some of you here today have joined our recent training program on introducing faith-consistent investing. We also offered tailored one-to-one accompaniment with faith organizations who are looking to become more faith-aligned in their investments, or who are looking to go further and to deepen their faith-consistent investing journey. So just on to the next slide, please. And the next one, please. So at the heart of what we support and what we do are your faith values. A faith organization's values and beliefs are what we see as the bedrock of faith-consistent investing, but only when they are integrated into an organization's investment strategy. We hear the word values a lot, particularly at the moment, but what are values? So your values, your faith organization's values, they are the guiding principles that are derived from religious beliefs and teachings. And faith beliefs and values, they're rooted in the doctrines. They provide a framework for how your faith organization makes sense of the world, and they are integral to your sense of identity as a faith organization, to your practice as a faith, and to your mission. To the next slide, please. So for us here in FaithInvest, we believe that your faith values are your North Star when it comes to faith-consistent investing. We hold this symbol quite a lot because your faith values help guide your investment decisions and the direction that your investments take. Where do you find your values? Your values are in your sacred texts. They are within your traditions and teachings. You'll find them in your foundational stories, your religious leaders, and also within the heritage of your faith organization. And they're often reflected in your mission statements, for example. Just while I'm speaking, it'd be useful for you to even just think about if you can name the values of your faith organization, and if this comes quite easy, or if more work is required to unpack those values. Next slide, please. So in our work here in FaithInvest, we find that many faith organizations, they hold their rich faith values on the one side, but their investment policies and practices on the other side, without making a connection between both worlds. And we find this quite interesting because it is often the case that faith values are very much integrated into the mission work of faith organizations, into the justice work, the outreach, the social work of faith organizations, but it's not always the case that they're integrated within the investment strategies of that organization. So in FaithInvest, we track investment policies over time, and this is something that I encourage all of you to do, is to send in, if you have one, your investment policy and guidelines, and we review the extent to which your faith is reflected in those guidelines. So this pie chart on the screen shows that of the 100 or so investment policy and guidelines that we reviewed, for some 45% of those documents, there was no mention of faith within the policy and the guidelines. And this has implications for how much faith organizations can remain true to their faith principles in their investments. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, before I hand over to my colleague Mathew, just some definition to help guide you in your thinking as we listen to Mathew over the next 10 minutes or so. So what exactly is faith-consistent investing? So faith-consistent investing is about intentionally aligning all the assets that are available to invest with what your faith organization wants to achieve. And we do this by integrating your faith values and beliefs into the foundational documents of your investments, your governance documents, and into the processes. And we do this because it roots investment decisions and it translates your faith values into traditional investment languages and practices. So just hold the emphasis here on intention, integration, and rooting. Next slide. So don't mean to overload here, but just to introduce you to this idea of an investment policy and guidelines, perhaps some of you are familiar with this already. Mathew is going to spend a little bit more time on this, but just to inform you. So the investment policy and the guidelines is the strategic documents that outlines the principles and the rules governing the investments of the funds of your organization. If you can see it almost as a roadmap for making investment decisions. And Mathew is now going to take us through what can happen if your faith values are not up front and center in those documents. And then how can you go about integrating your values into your documents to become more faith aligned? Over to Mathew.
Hey, hi, Catherine. Hi, hello, everybody. Wonderful to see everyone here. It's important. I get this question a lot. That pie chart that we showed earlier, that's actually a survey of faith institutions. It's not everybody. These are faith institutions, and 45% of them have not integrated their faith into how they manage their portfolios. Which, me coming to the space about 5 years ago, after growing up in the investment industry, was very, very surprising. And so I wondered why aren't more faith organizations doing this? And this page kind of starts to give you a sense. It's a lot of work to do that. And there's a number of places where you need to integrate it. And I'm sure already in your head, you're thinking, well, Catherine asked me to recall or recollect the values of my organization. And now you're probably thinking, well, how do I actually translate that particular value into an investment structure I would hand an investment manager? What's that process like? And I think a lot of organizations get to that step and don't go any further. We're here to help you get through that step. And I will say that 55% of organizations who do this, signing this declaration or signing up for this declaration from Operation Noah is easy for them because they've already put it through. Most faiths have a care for the planet value or belief as part of their core values and beliefs as an organization. They probably already doing many of the things in the various categories of the declaration. and it should be relatively easy for them to do that. But for the 45% who have no faith values, and maybe they have some screening criteria, but they're not sure why, it just seemed like the right thing to do, you might be a little more difficult to do it because you're not sure of the context. So we're here to help you very, very quickly go through the context. So the thing I say is, if it's not in your policy and guidelines, it's not in your portfolio. These are the governing documents for your portfolio. They tell you what you can do in the portfolio. So if your faith is not in these documents, your faith is not likely in the portfolio, and you're going to struggle to sign something like this declaration. And you're going to have other issues as well. You're going to have people wondering, well, why do we own that company? Why are we invested in that country? Why do we hold that bond? When I think about what I hear preached in the pews every week, why are we doing this in our portfolio? And we're looking to avoid situations like that. The policy and guidelines are key. They're fundamental. We start there. And then you need the other processes, governance, and communication around that. So let's jump in a little bit. Next slide, please. The real reason here is if your faith, beliefs, teachings, and values are not defined in your investment policy, and they're not integrated in your guidelines, you're going to have unintended outcomes in the portfolio. Your portfolio is going to be a jumble of things. And what I like to say to organizations who are on this path is, I should be able to look at your policy and guidelines. I should be able to look at your portfolio, and I should be able to learn something about your faith and what it values. But oftentimes, when I don't see faith integrated in the investment policies and guidelines, I see a portfolio that's a jumble of things that doesn't say much about that organization. So let's change that. Next slide, please. So the investment policy and the investment guidelines, and if you haven't seen yours for your organization, get a copy and read it. And figure out, are you one of the 45% or are you one of the 55% on that slide? If you're one of the 55%, are the things that are missing? Are there values that aren't captured in that portfolio? So you'll see when you read that document, you'll have an investment policy. And that's usually the first part of the document. And that's where some of the high-level concepts are expressed. The faith values that you look to express, the overall objectives and purpose of that portfolio, the activities that you intend to do in that portfolio, like screening, like company engagement, like possibly impact investing. And then the rest of the document, called the investment guidelines, is going to get very specific. And this is essentially a translation of your policy into instructions that you can hand an asset manager, your investment manager or your consultant, and they will know what to do with it in the portfolio. Next slide, please. What you will find as you go through this process is you'll start with your values. So you've already thought of some of the values of your organization, and you've documented those beautifully, probably in your investment policy. We call that the front door. If your values are not captured in your investment policy, the rest of the house is going to be a mess. So let's get the front door right and get those values documented. And there's some fantastic examples out there of faith organizations that have really clearly and crisply and briefly talked about the values they want to express in their assets. But what you're going to quickly realize when you get to the other side, when you get to the investment guidelines and you start trying to translate some of those values into investment instructions, you're going to run into this investment pragmatics. You're going to run into some of the realities of the marketplace, and you're going to have to make some difficult decisions. You're going to have to make some trade-offs, and you're going to have to put some things on a wish list to do in the future. And why is that? Next slide, please. This is why. Navigating the pragmatic. So on the pie chart on the right-hand side, at about the 11 o'clock to noon position, you can see the faith values. And if you're one of the 45% who don't have faith values integrated, this is a new slice of the pie that's being inserted into all these other requirements that are put on the assets in the portfolio. So you have certain return expectations, you have liquidity requirements, or how quickly can I get cash out of this pool of assets. You have risk requirements. I don't want to lose any money, or it can't be more volatile than the stock market is. Your asset size is going to determine what you can do. And you may have expense considerations. How much can we pay our investment managers? How much can we pay our consultants? And now all of a sudden your faith values need to interact with all these other conditions that are put on the portfolio. And it's this interaction between your values and these other parameters that are going to lead to some changes to your investment guidelines, but they're also going to lead to some tough decisions and a wish list on the trade-offs you need to make. Your faith value may call for you to protect indigenous peoples and indigenous cultures, and you may find in doing your investment research, the only way to do that effectively is through impact funds. Well, impact funds have very low liquidity and sometimes very high expenses that may be outside what you're capable of doing on that portfolio. And that may be something that has to go on a wish list for the future because of that interaction. Not to downplay this. This is a difficult process. It takes time and patience and the right people around the table to get through this process. But once you're through, it's eternal. It's forever. You've done the work. You've integrated your faith values into your policy, into your guidelines, and now you have instructions that your asset managers are acting on, and you're looking at a portfolio that reflects your values. The two things I like to remind folks going through this process is, one, have the presence. These are your assets. This is your organization. It's not your asset manager's assets. It's not your consultants or advisors' assets. These are your assets. Be the owner in these discussions. And the second thing I'll say in this interaction between values and essentially the investment marketplace is be prepared. Know the language, know your asset managers, have someone by your side who knows the language and can help you with some of the translation of the lingo you're going to get from the asset management industry. And be persistent. Keep asking questions. You may get a no right off the bat. Ask why. Why no? When? Be persistent in some of these things. And look, if the asset manager isn't willing to work with you, they may not be the asset manager for you. There's a lot of great options and choices out there. Next slide, please. Oop, back one. There we go. So we've done a lot of this work, and we have a lot of research out there on how to go through this process. We've got some wonderful case studies as well. And actually, I think I see Sister Carmel from the Society Holy Child Jesus on here. A wonderful project with them, their organization on integrating faith values and the guidelines all the way through to the portfolios that we've written up as a case study. If you're curious what the process is like and what organizations go through to be successful here, we've got that case study and others on our website. Catherine, have we covered it?
I think we're ready for questions. Mathew?
Thank you so much. So we're going to hear now from Mike Sturgess, who has been putting some of this work into practice in the Diocese of Truro. So the Green Investment Declaration is all about supporting churches and other faith and institutions across the globe to increase their investments in climate solutions to build a greener future. And we're really grateful for Catherine and Mathew in laying down some of that groundwork that you might want to do as an organisation to think through your values, think through what that means for your investment policies. But we thought it was really important to actually hear what that looks like in practice. So Mike, we'd like to have you with us. You're chair of Truro Diocesan Board of Finance in the Church of England. The Board of Finance is the company that employs the diocesan staff, pays the clergy and manages the diocese £120 million net assets. We're delighted to have you with us and would like to invite you now to share a little bit about the journey that you've been going on. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, and it is great to be here. I guess when we look at our journey would have started with our environment strategy, which was cherish creation, cut carbon, and speak up. So it picks up some of the themes we've been talking about today. And to make sure we implemented that, we have an environment board, and every part of the diocese reports quarterly on their progress in their action plan to reach net zero by 2030. So it's really quite integrated. I mean, Catherine from FaithInvest talked about intentionally aligning all of your assets with our beliefs. Well, we just mentioned we got about 120 million based on our last statutory accounts. I've done some work to identify what I think is faith aligned, and we are probably heading at the moment to about 12% aligned, and I expect by within the next 12 months about 20% of our net assets will be aligned, mainly because we're putting a lot of time and effort into retrofitting our houses to get them up to EPCA rating or as close as possible. And so we're also working with our glebe land. This is the land that we own, lots of little parcels of land, but looking for potential projects that we can do. So as well as development opportunities, we're looking for opportunities with renewable projects, maybe solar and or battery storage. We're looking for environmental projects, or even sort of we've mapped all of our land against the grid to see where we might have an opportunity for a renewable project. So that's sort of the background of what we're doing. But I guess now we need to sort of turn towards our investments, which is our sort of primary focus that we're going to be talking about today. The money that we've got on the market, investments, came primarily from past sales of land and surplus housing. We did actually ask FaithInvest to score our investment policy. We did reasonably well. We got about a 7 out of 10. But whilst we had exclusions, we won't invest in fossil fuel, we didn't have the positive screening. And so we're still going to be aiming to work with them to include guidance as well as pure policy. And I think that's important to have both. This is where we want to be going rather than where we are. When we sold surplus land or when we sold land or surplus houses, we used to have a decision as, are we going to invest it or do we need the money for something else in the short term? And if we're going to invest it, which of our two managers, CCLA and M&G, were we going to invest with? I guess our journey started with us seeking to disinvest from fossil fuel extraction. And CCL had already disinvested, but M&G weren't. And they promised us a fossil fuel-free portfolio. And we kept negotiating with them and asking when it was going to happen, and it didn't. And in the end, we decided, as we've just heard from Mathew, well, these aren't the funders for us, and we decided that we were going to sell all of their shares. Now, before we got to that stage, we'd had some money and decided when we looked at the balance of our portfolio, we wanted to invest directly in infrastructure. And this was the first time as a diocese we've invested in funds directly rather than through a fund manager. And we put 3 funds, invested £1 million into 3 funds back in September 2020. And one of those was specifically a renewables infrastructure fund. Then we had another £750,000 the next spring to invest. And so we put that, and that was now deliberately targeted at 3 renewable funds. So we were starting to get a little bit more. We had decided to get to change from M&G. We interviewed 2 new fund managers with high ESG credentials. So that's environmental, social, and governance. We actually liked them both. So we were going to choose one and put 5 million, which is what was roughly in M&G, across to them. We sold another £5 million worth of investments, primarily property funds, because we were heavily invested in property anyway, and some other funds. And we created a £10 million pot that we split equally between the 2 new fund managers. So now when we look at our infrastructure funds, what we've got within our other fund managers, we're estimating about 10% of our stock market investments are now invested in renewable technology. I mentioned earlier, we talked about disinvestment from fossil fuel extraction. We had a huge debate about what does it mean to disinvest from fossil fuel? Because loads of people are still driving around in diesel cars or petrol cars. Fossil fuel is still part of our economy at the moment, and so we can't disinvest from everything. So we really focused on the extraction, the Shells, the BPs, the Mobil, Exxon, and so on. When we come to look at renewables, we had the same discussion of what counts as renewable. And so we have included solar, wind, hydro. If you've got offshore wind, we've included the infrastructure to get the electricity from offshore onto the mainland. We've got a very small holding in through one of our funds in nuclear power. I think it's something like 0.6% of our investment portfolio. And we would include tidal power if there are any of those, but I don't think we've got any tidal in our portfolio. So that's the calculation. Now it's a rough and ready calculation. It's relatively easy if you've got an investment directly into a renewables fund. But if you're looking at your CCLA or other funders, you can find out quite easily. So I went and looked at our CCLA CBF investment fund, and you get the report from those, and you can see at the back when we get to infrastructure, CCLA investment fund is 3.88%, so 3.88% invested in renewables. But they've then also got some general infrastructure. And then you've got to start looking and say, well, okay, is any of these general infrastructure funds, do they include investment? And that's when the work really starts. And of course, you do a calculation today and the stock market moves and the percentage moves with it. So this is very much a, not quite a back of an envelope or fag packet, as we used to say in my day, but it's a bit of a rough and ready estimate. It's not going to be a precise calculation. We have been investing in trying to calculate our carbon footprint. In 2022, we estimated it was 629 tons of CO2 equivalent. This is just in our investment portfolio. In 2023, it had fallen to 571. We've got no idea whether that is because of changes in the companies themselves, or changes in the portfolio, or changes in the way they calculate it. This is a very imprecise calculation, but we felt it's important to try and get a benchmark to see how our portfolio is progressing. Interestingly, what that did tell us is that one of the highest emissions is from one of our initial non-renewable infrastructure companies. So I can see that in the future we will be looking at this and saying, well, okay, why have we got such high emission from them? Is this the right fund to be investing in? In the same way as we sold M&G, I could see we may well say, right, we're going to sell that fund and we'll look to put it into something else. From a balanced portfolio, we feel that on the investment at the moment, at least 10% of our investment being invested into renewables is probably about the most we want to push it. But now when I looked at those numbers for emissions, that doesn't include any of the emission savings that we've got from renewables. So, you know, if you start to knock off the CO2 saved by having all the green investments, I suspect it'll be a lot lower. Anyway, I think that's probably enough from me, because I think it's important to leave a lot of time for questions. So I'll stop here and pass over for Q&A.
Mike, thank you so much. Really, really helpful to hear your story. One of the really important things about the Green Investment Declaration is that opportunity for us to speak out about the work that is happening, to share those positive stories, to share that honest journey that you've been on, that way that you've really intentionally tried to ask those difficult questions, to have those conversations, to move more of your money into the things that you can see have positive impact. So thank you for sharing that with us. So I'd like to encourage you to explore the declaration, to visit the page, to read the text of the declaration, to consider whether this is something that your church, your organisation could work towards signing up to. And you may already be operating at one of the levels on the declaration. I'm sure that will be the case for many of you. So please do be in touch with us so that we can get you signed up. And as we've said, I think throughout today, one of the really important things about this declaration is about telling the stories and about inspiring and equipping others. So we would love to hear the work that you've been doing. If you're a lay person within your organisation, you don't have any particular involvement in your investments, there are so many ways for you to still be involved, to share these with those who do make those decisions, to learn more about the issues yourselves, to talk with others. And again, if there are ways that could help you do that, then we'd love to hear from you. And yeah, please stay in touch. Please get in touch if you have questions. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar with those who signed up to the webinar and the resources that have been linked to today, along with the slides. So you have plenty to digest in your own time, which just leaves me to thank you all for joining us today, and to say a very big thank you to all our speakers, to Clare, to Catherine, to Mathew and to Mike. Have a very good rest of the day, wherever you are in the world, and thank you so much for joining us.